Good afternoon. Some big news out of the Vancouver Canucks today, shoring up their coaching staff. Now, it came out about a month ago that Jim Benning would remain as general manager of the Canucks, to some chagrin of most Canucks fans. And then it came out about 2.5 weeks ago that Travis Green would be extended and remain the head coach of the Vancouver Canucks. And the Canucks have always had this sort of top-down approach, right? Let's get the general manager signed, let's get the head coach signed, and then worry about everyone else down below. And that caused some worries for the Canucks since, I mean, if you look at the names up in the top right corner here, most of these, 4 of these guys didn't have contracts coming into this next season. And especially Ian Clark being the big one, who has sort of a history of setting a hard deadline and then leaving if that deadline isn't met. So the fact that it took until May 21st for Travis Green to get extended, these guys were basically all free agents and had free reign to sign elsewhere. But the Canucks make some moves to get these guys extended. The first one we'll talk about here is Nolan Bumgartner. Now, if you've watched NHL hockey for the past, I guess, 30 or 25 years, Nolan Bumgarner has been sort of around the league forever. He was basically a tweener between the AHL and NHL. He played for the Canucks for a few years within the 2000s. Basically joined up as an assistant coach in Utica in Chicago for the Canucks AHL team, and then in Utica for a few years. And he's been an assistant under Travis Green ever since. So for the past 4 years there, he'll be extended. He's basically been the defensive coach for the team. So Nolan Bumgartner was someone who, personally, I wasn't too worried whether he got re-signed or not. I think the Canucks defense has had some issues. Sometimes kind of hard to tell whether that is a coaching thing or a personnel thing or both. Personnel has definitely been an issue for the Vancouver Canucks. So I guess hopefully Nolan Bumgartner gets the chance to maybe coach some higher end players. I mean, Quinn Hughes, obviously, but Jack Rathbone stepping up into the big club as well, hopefully next year. Next on our list is Jason King. Jason King, one of the assistant coaches, was one of the assistant coaches in Utica up until last year. He got brought in just the past season here to the big club. He gets an extension. He'll stay with the team. Darryl Seward, video coach. So he's the guy who, brings the video, brings out the old projector into the meeting room, and does some coaching there. He's staying on. I'd assume he's also the guy who calls down with the offside challenges and things like that, which no team in the NHL is usually that good at those anyways. So he'll get brought back. And then the biggest one, of course, here, Ian Clark. And he has obviously been a big part for the Vancouver Canucks. He's been their goaltending coach basically from 2002 all the way down until 2010, 2011-ish. So he was basically the goaltending coach who worked with Roberto Luongo forever. Then he was in Columbus for about 8-9 seasons, something like that. Worked a lot with Bobrovsky there. He leaves, comes back to Vancouver a couple of years ago to work with Jacob Markstrom, really turned Jacob Markstrom into the player that he is today. And that was one of the big reasons why Canucks fans have really looked at Ian Clark as an essential piece, right? You talk about signing your goaltender, Thatcher Demko, to 5 years, $5 million a year, $25 million. You're committing $25 million to your goaltender of the future. And you have a goaltending coach who has proven himself well with Roberto Luongo, Bobrovsky, basically turning Jacob Markstrom from a decent goaltender into probably one of the top 10 goalies in the league last year. And now we see the same thing with Thatcher Demko, who has been very good for the Vancouver Canucks, again, under the tutelage of Ian Clark. You start to think, well, if you're going to commit $25 million to your starting goalie, what does a goaltending coach make, right? Like, it's not like he's probably one of the highest paid goaltending coaches in the NHL. He's very high pedigree. But at the end of the day, what is he making? Like maybe $1 million, maybe less, right? So maybe it might be worth making that extra little financial commitment to have him working with your goaltenders. And we saw it at the end of the season when we were still waiting on obviously more news, and it was looking like Ian Clark wouldn't come back. Thatcher Demko came out and he said, basically he was pleading with the Canucks organization to re-sign this guy. And we had heard from guys like Kevin Woodley that it's a pretty rare thing. Lots of goalies aren't big fans of their goalie coaches. They work them hard, and it can be sort of a love-hate relationship with them. But when you have a guy like Thatcher Demko, your goalie of the future, right? He is the guy coming out and saying he's the best in the world, and I really want them to keep him on. And then you get Braden Holtby, who played forever in Washington, was an excellent goalie, and now is here. And even he's coming out and saying, yeah, Ian Clark's one of the best out there. You got to get that guy locked down. And the Canucks did. And for a while, like I said, it didn't look like that was going to happen. We had heard that the reason that him and Columbus had a falling out and he came back to Vancouver was because he had set a hard deadline that he wanted a contract extension by that wasn't met, and he moved on. And so when the Canucks hadn't done anything by his hard line contract extension deadline, it looked like the Canucks were going to lose out on Ian Clark because they had spent this time waiting to ensure Jim Benning was going to come back and then waiting to ensure that Travis Green was going to be their guy moving forward. So the fact that they go out, they get it done, great news for the team. I don't know exactly how long it is. I don't think that came out as an actual number yet. I'm sure the media will get some more info on that, whether it's 2 years to sort of stick on the timeline of Benning and Green. However, when you look at your assistant coaches, I see that, right? If you're looking at like a Nolan Bumgartner, Jason King, Chris Higgins, guys like that, you might want to have their contracts lining up with the head coach because they're underneath the head coach. However, when you look at something like goaltending coaches are kind of on their own thing, right? If you got a good goaltending coach, doesn't really matter who the head coach is above that. And we've seen that with the New York Rangers. The New York Rangers have their goaltending coach who I think he's survived 4 head coaches, which is, very impressive. And obviously, Ian Clark was in Vancouver for 8 years, survived a couple of coaches there. In Columbus for 9 years, survived a few coaches there as well, or 8 years or whatever it was. So goaltending coaches, again, I think you almost want to align that more with your goaltender instead of your head coach. So we'll see how I'm sure it'll come out, whether it's 2 years to line up with Green, 5 years to line up with Demko, maybe something in the middle. They might have had to give him a little more term, a little more dollar value to get him to stick around. It also came out Chris Higgins also staying with the team. I don't think he had a new extension. I think he was still under contract. They basically just confirmed that he will resume his role as assistant director of player development after he was a skill and development coach during the 2021 season. So going back more into the player development side, again, makes a little bit of sense, right? With the AHL team being in Abbotsford, Chris Higgins might be a guy where they send back and forth to Abbotsford and Vancouver, who can sort of cover all of the bases there. They hired 2 new guys as well. They add an assistant coach in Brad Shaw. Brad Shaw, if you've never heard of him, he played in the NHL in the late 80s and throughout the 90s, 377 NHL games. But mostly, he was the assistant slash associate coach for the St. Louis Blues for about 10 years between 2006 and 2016. The last 5 years, he has been in Columbus as an assistant coach there under Tortorella. So he got let go with the rest of that coaching staff in Columbus. He will join the Vancouver Canucks as an assistant coach. And Kyle Gustafson, who is basically coming out of the WHL. He has been an assistant coach in Portland since 2003. So almost 20 years as an assistant coach in the WHL, moved up to an associate coach and assistant general manager there for the past couple of years. So seems like a good sort of younger, a younger guy who is maybe starting to move up the ranks, worked in the WHL forever, maybe a guy who can maybe work his way up the ranks of the Canucks organization or in some other organization in the future. The Canucks also have a loss. They lose one member of the team. They add 2 assistant coaches and they let one go. That's Newell Brown. Newell Brown was well known as the power play coach for the Vancouver Canucks for the last few years. And lots of people had issues with Newell Brown as the power play coach. Whether it was the drop pass, and again, every team in the NHL does a drop pass. However, the Canucks didn't do it optimally. It never seemed to work for the Canucks as well as it works for other teams. And a very stagnant power play, right? You're talking about a Canucks power play that's very top heavy, right? You got Elias Pettersson, JT Miller, Brock Besser, Bo Horvat, Quinn Hughes, right? That's a power play that should be scoring a lot of goals. one of the, I think they were like 24th or something in the league in power play percentage this year. It might have been higher, might have been lower, but it was something around there. Not great, even though it was pretty good last year. But he is on the way out. We'll see who takes over the power play duties, whether it is Brad Shaw, who was sort of a power play specialist when he played, or something like that. So whether it's Brad Shaw, maybe this is what the Sedins are coming in for. Who knows? Might be good to keep track of. But anyways, that's pretty much all I've got for this one. You can subscribe, hit like, do all that good stuff down below. I've got a second channel. I do a podcast every Monday. All that's linked down below. So go click on those. And yeah, we'll see you in the next one.